He hacked into the security app, a familiar bitterness coiling in his gut. 11 caregivers had come before her, each a fresh wave of disappointment crashing against the fortress he'd built around his heart. They had failed, stolen, betrayed. They'd left his sons less than whole. So when his phone screen flickered to life, and he saw the 3 wheelchairs abandoned in the center of the living room like discarded shells, a cold fist squeezed his insides. Then he saw them, his 3 paralyzed sons, standing, not just standing but taking tentative, wobbly steps, moving, reaching, drawn forward by the magnetic pull of Angela's outstretched arms. Andrew's phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. He stumbled backward, his spine slamming against the wall, the breath knocked from his lungs. He stared, transfixed, at the impossible unfolding before him. The man who had resigned himself to a life defined by limitations, the man who had accepted never as the final word, watched that word shatter into a million pieces on a screen in his own living room. 2 years. 2 years ago, Andrew Grant had lost everything that gave his life color, texture, meaning. His wife, Sarah, the vibrant center of his world, had been stolen from him in the cruelest of ways. 45 minutes after delivering their triplets, she was gone. No warning, no final embrace, no whispered goodbye, just a sterile, cold hospital room and 3 premature babies clinging precariously to life. Andrew had held her hand until the last vestiges of warmth had fled, until the silence in the room became unbearable. Then, numb with grief, he had walked out to meet his sons. Philip, Eric, Adam. 3 tiny, fragile bodies, 3 uncertain futures laid bare before him. The doctors, with their practiced bedside manner and grave pronouncements, hadn't waited long to deliver the second blow. Cerebral palsy. All 3 boys. Severe. The kind that burrowed deep into muscles and bones. A relentless vice grip that wouldn't loosen. "Mr. Grant, we need to prepare you," the neurologist had said, his voice laced with a pity Andrew had already come to despise. "Based on the brain imaging and muscle response tests, independent ambulation is highly unlikely. Possibly never." Andrew had heard the words, each syllable a hammer blow against his already fractured soul, but they hadn't truly registered. Not then. He was still drowning in the fresh, raw grief of burying his wife, still grappling with the sheer, overwhelming responsibility of raising 3 severely disabled children alone. Weeks bled into months. The boys didn't improve. They didn't reach milestones. They remained trapped in custom wheelchairs, their small bodies slumped, their still eyes gazing blankly into a future that seemed as bleak and unyielding as the Connecticut winter. Andrew, fueled by a desperate, almost manic energy, threw money at the problem. He hired the best therapists money could buy, flew in specialists from Europe with cutting-edge techniques and experimental treatments. He purchased state-of-the-art equipment that cost more than most people's homes. Robotic exoskeletons, virtual reality training systems, sensory deprivation tanks promising miraculous results. Nothing changed. The boys didn't walk. They barely moved. And Andrew, increasingly isolated in his sprawling, echoing Connecticut mansion, began to accept the inevitable. His sons would never stand, never run, never chase each other through the sun-drenched hallways like he had once, in his naivete, imagined. He buried that cherished hope right next to Sarah, in the cold, unforgiving earth. Then came the caregivers. 11 in 18 months. A revolving door of strangers traipsing through his home, each one a fleeting reminder of his failure. The first quit after 2 weeks, claiming that watching the boys was too sad, as if their suffering was a burden she couldn't bear. The second spent more time glued to her phone, scrolling through social media, than interacting with his sons. Andrew had fired her on the spot, the words of dismissal tasting like ash in his mouth. The third had seemed almost too good to be true, until he discovered she'd sold photos of his boys' medical equipment to a sleazy tabloid for a measly $600. After that, something had irrevocably broken inside him. The trust he'd once possessed, the innate belief in the goodness of humanity, had withered and died. One caregiver stole medication from the house, presumably to feed her own addiction. Another accessed his financial accounts and vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of forged signatures and empty promises. Each one had arrived with a practiced smile and a carefully crafted resume. Each one had left with his trust bleeding out behind them, staining the pristine floors of his home with the bitter residue of disappointment. Andrew retreated, drawing the world in around him like a suffocating shroud. He stopped seeing people, stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. He saw risks everywhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. He installed security cameras in every room, every hallway, turning his home into a digital panopticon. He spent his nights hunched over his computer, endlessly watching the footage, rewinding and zooming, searching for the telltale flicker of a lie, the subtle angle of deception, the inevitable betrayal he knew was coming. Control became his only solace, his only protection against a world that seemed determined to inflict pain. So when Angela Bailey walked through his front door, 29 years old, with a quiet composure that bordered on stoicism, Andrew didn't see a person. He saw the 12th failure waiting to happen, another carefully constructed facade that would crumble under the weight of reality. No improvising, he had told her, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, not even bothering to look up from her file. No bonding, no empty hope speeches. Follow the medical protocol exactly. The doctors have made their prognosis clear. Angela had simply nodded, her expression unreadable. I understand. But she hadn't understood. Or maybe she had understood too well. Because Angela didn't follow his rules. She sang to those boys when she thought no one was watching. Her voice a low, soothing melody that seemed to resonate with something deep within their souls. She moved their legs in patterns the therapists had never taught, mimicking the natural rhythm of walking, as if trying to awaken dormant memories in their muscles. She whispered words of encouragement, not platitudes or empty promises, but genuine, heartfelt affirmations, as if she truly believed they could hear her, as if she truly believed they could become more than their diagnosis. And Andrew watched it all through his network of cameras, a silent, invisible observer in his own home. At first, he watched with a grim satisfaction, waiting to catch her making mistakes, eager to confirm his own cynical expectations. Then he watched because he couldn't look away, because something was undeniably happening in that house, something small at first, almost imperceptible. Philip smiled during her songs, a genuine, unforced expression of joy that lit up his face. Eric's fingers twitched when she played music, a subtle, involuntary response that hinted at a connection to the world around him. Adam held his head up longer than he ever had before, his gaze, though unfocused, directed towards the sound of her voice. Andrew told himself it meant nothing. He told himself hope was a dangerous illusion, a cruel mirage that would ultimately lead to greater disappointment. He told himself the doctors knew best, that their prognosis was based on years of research and clinical experience. But late at night, alone in his darkened office, with the blue glow of the monitors painting his face with an eerie, spectral light, Andrew watched a woman fight for his sons, armed with nothing but patience, belief, and an unwavering determination. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he thought had died with Sarah, a small, fragile seed of hope started to crack, pushing its way through the hardened earth of his despair. He didn't trust it. He couldn't. Because hope, when you've buried it that deep, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a trap, a carefully concealed snare waiting to spring shut and crush you. But before we go any further, take a moment to smash that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Have you ever felt like hope was too risky, like believing again might break you? Then this story is for you. Because sometimes, miracles don't ask for permission. They just show up, uninvited, unexpected, and utterly transformative. The mansion woke up the same way every morning. Quiet. Not a peaceful, serene quiet, but a heavy, oppressive silence. The kind that pressed against your chest, stealing your breath. Andrew stood at the kitchen window, the ceramic mug cradled in his hands growing cold, the dark, bitter liquid inside mirroring the taste in his mouth. He watched the sun rise over the manicured perfection of the back garden, a sterile landscape devoid of joy. The gardener was already out there, meticulously trimming hedges that no one walked past anymore, shaping the greenery into precise, geometric forms, a futile attempt to impose order on a world spiraling out of control. The ornate fountain in the center of the lawn, once a vibrant centerpiece, hadn't run in months, its sculpted figures covered in a film of algae and neglect. Andrew kept meaning to call someone about it, to have it repaired and restored to its former glory. He never did. Behind him, down the long, echoing hallway that led to the east wing of the house, he heard the soft whir of a motorized wheelchair, a sound that had become as familiar and unwelcome as the relentless ticking of a clock. The morning nurse was moving one of the boys, probably Eric. Eric liked to sit by the window in the therapy room when the morning light streamed through, bathing his pale skin in a fleeting warmth. Andrew didn't turn around. He used to. In the beginning, right after they came home from the hospital, Andrew would rush to every sound, every cry, every small movement, his heart pounding with a desperate hope that he tried to tamp down. He would sit between their cribs for hours, watching their tiny chests rise and fall, terrified that if he looked away, even for a second, something would go wrong, that one of them would slip away from him just as Sarah had. Sarah would have been better at this, he thought, the familiar pang of grief twisting in his gut. She had wanted children more than anything in the world. 5 long years of trying, 5 years of hope and disappointment, of ovulation trackers and fertility clinics and tearful nights spent wondering what they were doing wrong. 3 grueling rounds of IVF, each one a roller coaster of emotions that ended in heartbreak. And when she had finally, miraculously, gotten pregnant with triplets, she had cried for 2 days straight, her body racked with sobs of pure, unadulterated joy. Happy tears, the kind that come when something you've wanted for so long finally becomes real, when a lifelong dream finally materializes into tangible form. Andrew remembered the nursery she had designed with such love and care. Pale yellow walls, hand-painted with a whimsical mural of elephants and giraffes frolicking in a lush jungle, 3 cribs arranged in a half-circle so the boys could see each other when they woke up, their tiny faces illuminated by the soft glow of a custom-made mobile adorned with felt stars and moons. That nursery sat empty now, a silent testament to a life that had been tragically cut short. The boys slept in medical beds in the therapy room, adjustable frames, safety rails, monitors that tracked their breathing and heart rates throughout the night, a constant reminder of their fragility. The yellow room with the animal mural had become a storage room for discarded equipment, a graveyard of broken promises and failed treatments, a place Andrew actively avoided. He took a sip of his cold coffee and winced, the bitter taste lingering on his tongue. The house was too big, a sprawling mausoleum filled with the ghosts of happier times. 27 rooms for a man who only used 3, his office, his bedroom, the kitchen when he remembered to eat. Everything else felt like a museum, meticulously preserved but utterly lifeless, a hollow shell devoid of warmth and connection. He'd bought this place for Sarah, fulfilling a lifelong dream of hers. She had loved old architecture, the imposing stone walls, the soaring high ceilings, the intricate details that spoke of a bygone era. She had said it felt like a home that had stories to tell, a place where memories could be made and cherished. Now, the only stories were the ones Andrew replayed on security footage at 2 in the morning, obsessively analyzing every frame, searching for clues, for answers, for some kind of explanation for the tragedy that had befallen his family. He set the coffee mug in the sink with a clatter that echoed in the vast kitchen and walked toward his office, the weight of the day settling upon his shoulders like a physical burden. The hallway stretched long and dim before him, a seemingly endless corridor lined with faded wallpaper and the ghosts of memories. Family photos used to line these walls, a vibrant tapestry of smiling faces and cherished moments. Sarah had insisted on it. "Houses need faces, Andrew," she'd say, her eyes sparkling with laughter. "Otherwise, they're just buildings, empty shells devoid of soul." Andrew had taken them down 6 months after she died, unable to bear the constant reminder of what he had lost. He couldn't pass her radiant smile 20 times a day, couldn't stand to see the unwavering hope in her eyes, The way she looked at him like he could fix anything, like he was capable of anything. He'd failed her. He thought bitterly, failed their sons, failed every promise he'd made in that sterile hospital room when he held her cold, lifeless hand and swore he'd take care of them, that he'd be both a mother and a father, that he'd give them the life they deserved. The frames had left faint outlines on the wallpaper, pale rectangles that served as haunting reminders of what had been and what could never be, ghosts of a life that almost happened. Andrew pushed open his office door and sank into his leather chair, the worn surface groaning beneath his weight. 3 large monitors glowed on the wall, each displaying a different view of his home. The living room, the hallway, the therapy room. There they were, his sons. Philip sat in his blue wheelchair, his small body slumped slightly to the side, his unfocused gaze fixed on a seemingly random spot on the bookshelf, lost in a world of his own. Eric was by the window, just as Andrew had guessed. His face bathed in the soft morning light, his eyes closed, his expression serene. Adam's eyes were also closed, his small body still and peaceful except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the subtle indication that he was still alive, still fighting. Angela moved between them, a silent guardian, adjusting blankets, straightening toys, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she understood that this room held something fragile, something precious. Andrew watched her hands, her gentle touch, the way she seemed to anticipate their needs before they even voiced them. 11 caregivers, 11 failures, 11 reasons to believe she would be no different, that she was simply biding her time before revealing her true colors. But she'd been here 3 weeks now, a small eternity in his world. No complaints, no shortcuts, no phone calls she shouldn't make, no cabinets she shouldn't open. Just quiet consistency, a relentless, unwavering dedication to her job. Andrew leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. That's what worried him most, the unwavering routine, the almost robotic precision with which she performed her duties. Angela had a schedule, a rigid, unwavering plan that she adhered to with unwavering precision. Every morning, she arrived in the therapy room at exactly 7 a.m. She'd greet the night nurse with a polite but perfunctory nod, review the boys' sleep charts with a practiced eye, and then spend the first 10 minutes just sitting with them, not talking, not adjusting anything, just present, her gaze sweeping over their small bodies, absorbing every detail. Andrew had noticed this through the cameras, the seemingly pointless ritual that she performed every morning. It had bothered him at first, a nagging suspicion that she was slacking off, that she was being paid to work, not to sit and do nothing. But then he realized something. She wasn't sitting idle. She was watching, learning, studying the way Philip's fingers curled when he was uncomfortable, the subtle furrow in his brow that indicated pain, the way Eric's breathing changed when he needed repositioning, the shallow, rapid gasps that signaled distress, the way Adam's eyes flickered beneath closed lids during his morning rest, the faint twitching that hinted at a world of thoughts and dreams hidden behind his silent facade. She was learning his sons in a way that Andrew had stopped trying to. He had become so focused on their limitations, so consumed by their disabilities, that he had forgotten to see them as individuals, as children with their own unique personalities, their own hopes and dreams, their own capacity for joy. On her 4th morning, Angela brought a small, portable speaker into the therapy room. Nothing fancy, just a cheap plastic thing she pulled from her bag. She set it on the shelf and pressed play. Soft piano music filled the room, a gentle melody that seemed to caress the silence. Andrew watched from his office, his finger hovering over the intercom button, ready to intervene, to shut it down, to reassert his control. This wasn't in the protocol. The boys had specific sound therapy sessions on Thursdays, administered by a licensed therapist with specialized training. Random music wasn't part of the plan. It was an unnecessary distraction, a potential disruption to their carefully structured routine. But he didn't press the button, because Philip turned his head. It was small, almost imperceptible, just a few degrees to the right, but Andrew saw it clearly on the screen, a subtle shift in his posture that defied all expectations. His son, who spent most days staring blankly at the same spot on the wall, had turned toward the sound, drawn by the ethereal beauty of the music. Angela noticed, too. She didn't make a fuss, didn't clap or cheer, didn't treat it as some kind of miraculous breakthrough. She just smiled softly, a quiet, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge the significance of the moment. And she adjusted the volume slightly higher, allowing the music to fill the room, to envelop his sons in its soothing embrace. Eric's fingers twitched against his armrest, a subtle, involuntary movement that mirrored Philip's response. Andrew leaned closer to the monitor, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of hope and disbelief warring within him. Angela knelt beside Eric's wheelchair, her movements slow and deliberate, careful not to startle him. She didn't touch him right away, just positioned herself in his line of sight and waited, allowing him to adjust to her presence. "You like that?" she asked quietly, her voice a gentle murmur. "It's Chopin. My grandmother used to play it on Sunday mornings, when I was a little girl. It always made me feel safe and happy." Eric didn't respond, but his fingers twitched again, the subtle spasms becoming more pronounced. Angela reached out and placed her hand near his, not touching, just close enough that he could feel her warmth if he wanted, that he could sense her presence without feeling pressured or overwhelmed. She stayed like that for a long moment, a silent connection forming between them, a bond built on empathy and understanding. Andrew's throat tightened, a lump forming in the back of his throat that made it difficult to swallow. When was the last time he'd sat with his sons like that, just being present, offering them his unconditional love and support without an agenda, without expectations? When was the last time he'd simply been there for them, without checking monitors or reviewing therapy reports or calculating how much the latest specialist was costing him? He couldn't remember, the memories blurred by a fog of grief and resentment. That afternoon, Andrew found himself inexplicably drawn toward the therapy room, his feet moving of their own accord. He told himself he needed to check the equipment, make sure everything was properly maintained, that the robotic exoskeletons were calibrated correctly, that the virtual reality headsets were functioning optimally. But when he reached the door and heard Angela's voice inside, he stopped, his hand hovering over the handle, unsure whether to enter or turn back. She wasn't reciting medical jargon or reading from a therapy guidebook, but a children's story, something about a rabbit who wanted to learn to fly. Everyone told him, "Rabbits don't fly," Angela read, her voice gentle and clear, infusing the words with warmth and emotion. But the little rabbit didn't listen. He climbed to the top of the hill every single day, and every single day he jumped, believing that one day he would soar. Andrew peered through the crack in the door, his eyes widening in surprise. The boys were arranged in a half-circle around her, their faces turned towards her, their expressions rapt. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, the book open in her lap, her eyes moving between the pages and their faces, checking for reactions, connecting with them on a deeper level. "Did he ever fly?" she asked them, her voice laced with playful curiosity. "What do you think?" Silence. But Adam's eyes were open, fixed on her face, his gaze unwavering, his small body tense with anticipation. Andrew stepped back from the door, his chest feeling strange, tight and loose at the same time, a confusing jumble of emotions that he couldn't quite decipher. He walked back to his office without entering the room, his mind reeling. That night, reviewing the footage, he watched her read that story 3 more times, each time paying close attention to the boys' reactions. He watched the way she changed her voice for different characters, bringing the story to life with her animated performance. He watched the way she paused to let the words settle, allowing his sons to absorb their meaning, to connect with the rabbit's unwavering determination. He watched his sons watch her, their eyes widening with wonder, their faces softening with hope. Something was shifting in that house. Andrew could feel it in his bones. A subtle tremor beneath the surface, a growing sense of unease that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He just didn't trust it yet, couldn't bring himself to believe that anything could truly change, that anything could ever be right again. Andrew couldn't stop watching. Every night after the house went dark, after the nurses had completed their rounds and the medication had been administered, he'd sit in his office with the glow of the monitors painting shadows across his face, his eyes glued to the screens. He told himself it was caution, responsibility, a father protecting his children from another betrayal, ensuring their safety and well-being. But that wasn't true anymore. He was watching because something was happening, something he didn't understand, something that defied all logic and reason. He was watching because he couldn't help himself, because he was drawn to the light that Angela had brought into his darkened world. A fragile, flickering flame that threatened to ignite a fire he thought had long been extinguished. Week 3. Angela had stopped following the protocol entirely, abandoning the rigid structure he had imposed upon her. It started small, with the music and the stories, things he could dismiss as harmless additions to her routine, minor deviations from the prescribed plan. But then it grew, slowly but inexorably, pushing the boundaries of what he considered acceptable, challenging his deeply ingrained beliefs. One evening, Andrew pulled up the afternoon footage and nearly choked on his whiskey, the amber liquid burning a fiery path down his throat. Angela was on the floor with Philip, her face inches from his, her expression one of intense concentration. She had his small legs in her hands and was moving them slowly, rhythmically, left, right, like he was walking, like his muscles remembered something his brain had forgotten, like she was trying to awaken a dormant memory, to unlock a potential that the doctors had deemed impossible. Andrew's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. This wasn't in any therapy plan. It was an unsanctioned, dangerous experiment that could potentially harm his son. No specialist had prescribed this, no medical professional had authorized it. She was improvising, breaking every rule he'd set, defying his explicit instructions. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling with a mixture of anger and fear, ready to call her, to fire her, to end this madness before it went any further, before she could inflict any more damage. But then Philip laughed. Not a big, boisterous laugh, the kind that filled a room with joy, but a small, tentative sound, barely more than a breath, a subtle exhalation of air that carried a hint of mirth. But Andrew heard it through the speakers, amplified by the digital technology, and his hand froze over the phone, unable to complete the action. His son was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in years, a sound he thought he'd never hear again. When was the last time he'd heard that sound? The unadulterated joy of a child's laughter. He couldn't remember, the memory buried beneath layers of grief and regret. Andrew set the phone down, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He kept watching, mesmerized by the scene unfolding before him, unable to tear his gaze away. Angela moved to Eric next, her movements fluid and graceful. She positioned a small toy truck just beyond his reach on the tray attached to his wheelchair. Not an insurmountable distance, but far enough that he would have to exert some effort to grab it. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice filled with encouragement. "You can do it. Just a little stretch. I know you're strong, I know you can reach it." Eric's arms stayed still, his fingers limp and unresponsive. Angela waited, patient, unhurried, giving him the time and space he needed to gather his strength, to summon his will. "I know you can," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I believe in you, Eric. I know you can do anything you set your mind to." Andrew watched the screen, holding his breath without realizing it, his body tense with anticipation. Eric's fingers twitched, a subtle tremor that ran through his hand. His arm moved slowly, painfully slowly, inching forward with agonizing effort. His small hand stretched toward the truck, his muscles straining, his face contorted with concentration. He touched it. His fingertips brushed against the cold plastic of the toy, a fleeting connection that sent a jolt of energy through his body. Angela's face broke into the widest smile, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Yes," she exclaimed, her voice filled with uncontained excitement. "Look at you, Eric. Look at what you just did. I knew you could do it." Eric's fingers curled around the toy, his grip weak but determined. Andrew's eyes burned, tears welling up and blurring his vision. He rewound the footage, replaying the scene again and again, each repetition amplifying the emotional impact. That small arm reaching, those tiny fingers closing around plastic, such a simple movement, something any other child would do without thinking, a meaningless gesture that wouldn't even register in their consciousness. But his son had just done the impossible, defying the odds, shattering the limitations that had been imposed upon him. Andrew rubbed his face with both hands, trying to regain his composure, to regain control of his emotions. This was dangerous, he thought, a dangerous game she was playing. All of it. The music, the stories, the unconventional exercises, the unwavering belief. Angela was giving his sons false hope, pushing them beyond what the doctors said they could do, setting them up for inevitable disappointment. When she failed, and she would fail, the crushing weight of that disappointment would destroy them, shatter their fragile spirits. Destroy him. He should fire her tomorrow morning, first thing, before she could do any more damage, before she could inflict any more pain. But instead of drafting a termination letter, instead of severing the connection that had formed between his sons and this woman, Andrew pulled up more footage, compelled by a force he couldn't understand. Adam, the smallest of the three, the most severely affected by the cerebral palsy, the one who kept his eyes closed most of the day, as if the world was too much to bear. Angela sat beside his wheelchair with a picture book, its pages filled with vibrant colors and simple shapes. She wasn't reading it, just showing him the colors, gently turning the pages, allowing him to absorb the visual stimuli. "This one's blue," she said, her voice soft and soothing, "like the sky on a summer day. And this one's yellow, like sunshine, like the warm rays on your face." Adam's eyes were open, fixed on the page, his gaze unwavering, his expression one of intense concentration. "You see it, don't you?" Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "You see everything, Adam. You're just waiting for the right moment to show us." She turned the page, revealing a splash of vibrant red. Adam's hand lifted from his lap. Just an inch, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it lifted. Angela noticed, her eyes widening with excitement. She gently took his small hand and placed it on the book, guiding his fingers to the smooth, glossy surface. "There you go, sweet boy," she murmured. "You touch it. It's yours." Andrew watched his son's fingers press against the paper, watched the slight flicker of recognition in his eyes, watched the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible sign that he was connecting with the world around him. Something cracked in his chest, deep and painful, a fissure opening in the hardened shell he had built around his heart. He closed the laptop slowly, the sudden darkness of the screen mirroring the turmoil within him. He sat in the darkness of his office, the silence amplifying his thoughts, and for the first time in 2 years, Andrew Grant didn't know what to believe, didn't know what to do. Andrew didn't plan to confront her. It just happened. A spontaneous eruption of pent-up emotions, a culmination of weeks of internal conflict. 3 weeks of watching through screens, 3 weeks of obsessively analyzing security footage, 3 weeks of sleepless nights spent wrestling with his demons. 3 weeks of seeing his sons respond to a woman who broke every rule he'd set, a woman who dared to challenge his deeply ingrained beliefs, a woman who had somehow managed to penetrate the fortress he had built around his heart. He couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty, the constant internal battle, the gnawing feeling that he was on the verge of losing control. Tuesday afternoon, Andrew left his office, his movements stiff and robotic, and walked down the hallway toward the therapy room, each step echoing against the polished marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the years of grief and regret, by the burden of his own expectations. He didn't knock, didn't announce his presence, just pushed the door open and stood there, his silhouette framed in the doorway, his face a mask of barely suppressed emotion. Angela was on the floor with Adam, her face inches from his, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had his small legs positioned in her hands, moving them in that same rhythmic pattern, left, right, like she was teaching his muscles to remember something they'd never learned, like she was trying to unlock a potential that had been dormant for too long. She looked up when the door opened, her eyes meeting his, and for a fleeting moment, Andrew saw something in her gaze, something that startled him, something that resonated deep within his soul. No surprise, no fear, just calm acknowledgement, as if she had been expecting him, as if she had been waiting for this confrontation. "Mr. Grant." Her voice was soft but firm, her tone respectful but not subservient. Andrew's voice came out harsher than he intended, the words laced with bitterness and resentment. "What are you doing?" Angela didn't stop the movement, didn't flinch under his scrutiny. "Motor pattern training. It helps build neural pathways, strengthens muscle memory, encourages circulation." "That's not in the protocol," Andrew snapped, his voice rising in anger. "I gave you specific instructions to follow the medical plan, to adhere to the prescribed treatments. No improvising, no experimental therapies, no deviations from the established guidelines." "No, sir," Angela replied calmly, her voice unwavering. "It's not." She gently lowered Adam's legs to the floor and stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate. She wiped her hands on her pants, a nervous gesture that belied her outward composure, and faced him directly, her gaze unwavering. "The medical plan has them sitting in wheelchairs all day with minimal stimulation, their muscles atrophying, their minds stagnating. That's not treatment, Mr. Grant. That's maintenance, a holding pattern until they die." Andrew's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "The doctors, the specialists, the medical professionals who have dedicated their lives to studying these conditions, they know what's best for my sons. They've spent years researching these diseases, conducting clinical trials, developing evidence-based treatments. The doctors gave you a prognosis, a statistical probability based on their research, a general overview of the likely outcome." Angela countered, her voice staying even, but something fierce lived beneath the surface, a spark of defiance that burned brightly in her eyes. "They looked at scans and charts and told you what usually happens, what the average result is for children with cerebral palsy. They didn't tell you what's possible, what your sons are capable of achieving if given the chance." "They're specialists," Andrew retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They've seen hundreds of cases like this, thousands of children with similar conditions. They know what they're talking about." "Have they seen your sons?" Angela asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but the question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Andrew stared at her, taken aback by her audacity, by her blatant disregard for his authority. "Excuse me?" Angela took a breath, gathering her courage, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. "Your boys aren't statistics, Mr. Grant. They're not case studies or data points. They're children, with unique personalities, individual needs, and untapped potential. And children deserve someone who sees them, not their diagnosis, someone who believes in them, not their limitations." Andrew felt heat rise in his chest, a burning anger that threatened to consume him. "You think you know better than doctors who've studied this for decades, who have dedicated their lives to helping children like my sons. I think I know that giving up on a child is the one thing guaranteed to fail," Angela replied, her voice unwavering, her gaze locked on his. Silence. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Andrew's hands were shaking, trembling with a mixture of anger and something else, something he couldn't quite identify, something that scared him. "You're filling their heads with false hope," he said quietly, his voice laced with desperation. "When this doesn't work, and it won't, they'll be devastated. The disappointment will crush them." Angela looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, a hint of compassion, but also something deeper, something more profound. Not pity, but empathy, a genuine connection to his pain. "They're 2 years old, Mr. Grant," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't know what false hope is. They only know what they feel, what they experience, what they believe. And right now, they feel someone believing in them, someone who sees their potential, someone who is willing to fight for them. Maybe for the first time." The words landed like a slap, a physical blow that knocked the wind out of him. Andrew opened his mouth to retort, to defend himself, to lash out in anger, but no words came. Angela turned back to Adam, kneeling beside his wheelchair, her movements gentle and caring. "You hired me to care for them?" she said softly, not looking at Andrew, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "That's what I'm doing." She resumed the leg movements, gentle, patient, consistent, her hands working with a practiced ease, her touch conveying a sense of hope and reassurance. Andrew stood there, frozen in place, watching her ignore him, feeling a strange mixture of anger and confusion, resentment and a hesitant admiration. His mind screamed to fire her, to call the agency right now and demand that she be replaced by someone more compliant, someone who would follow his rules, someone who wouldn't challenge his authority. But his feet wouldn't move, wouldn't obey his commands. Because deep down, in a place he had locked away and tried to ignore, a small voice whispered something he didn't want to hear, something that challenged his entire worldview. What if she's right? Andrew turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. He didn't say another word, didn't offer any explanation, didn't issue any threats. But he didn't fire her either, the act of omission speaking volumes. That night, Andrew couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk with a termination letter open on his laptop, the stark white screen reflecting the turmoil within him. The cursor blinked mockingly at the end of the first sentence, patient and unforgiving. Dear Miss Bailey, effective immediately, your services are no longer required. He'd written those words 11 times before, each. A faint, soft hum drifted up from the therapy room below. Angela was still singing to his sons. And in that moment, a truth Andrew had been desperately avoiding finally surfaced. It wasn't mere inconvenience that kept him from firing her. He was keeping her because, in 2 long years, she was the only soul who hadn't surrendered to the limitations imposed on his boys. And somewhere, buried deep beneath layers of grief and resignation, he needed to witness what unfolded when someone stubbornly refused to accept the impossible, even if that defiance ultimately consumed him. Week 4 arrived, and Andrew abandoned all pretense. He was consumed. Every night, after the house succumbed to darkness, he retreated to his office, summoning hours of security footage. He'd fast-forward through the sterile emptiness of hallways, only to slam the brakes on moments that constricted his chest with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He'd rewind scenes, compelled to watch them again, searching for some hidden key. Angela had subtly, almost imperceptibly, transformed the therapy room. Small shifts at first. She nudged the wheelchairs closer, allowing the boys to see each other, to share a silent camaraderie. The cold, sterile white blankets vanished, replaced by vibrant, colorful ones she'd brought from home, their patterns a jarring contrast to the room's former austerity. 2 potted plants, impossibly green and alive, now stood sentinel by the window. She'd said the boys needed to witness growth, to see life pushing upwards. Andrew hadn't stopped her. He probably should have. It wasn't standard protocol. But watching the room morph from a clinical space into something warm and lived-in stirred something dormant within him, something he couldn't quite name. Then the real changes began, the ones that defied all expectations. Thursday afternoon, the licensed physical therapist arrived for the boys' weekly session. Dr. Patterson, a woman who had been a fixture in their lives for the past 18 months, methodically examined each child, assessing muscle tone, joint flexibility, reflexes. Andrew watched through the cold, unblinking eye of the camera. She began with Philip gently manipulating his arm, then his leg. Her hands paused, hovering. She repeated the movement, her brow furrowed in concentration. Andrew leaned closer to the screen, his breath caught in his throat. Dr. Patterson looked up, beckoning Angela over. They spoke in hushed tones, heads bent close together, a conspiratorial air surrounding them. Andrew strained but could only catch fragmented phrases. Significant improvement in muscle tone. This is unusual. What specific exercises? Angela responded, explaining something with animated gestures. Dr. Patterson nodded slowly, her pen scratching furiously on her clipboard, documenting the unexpected findings. She then moved to Eric and Adam, examining them with a renewed, almost frantic level of attention. When she finally departed an hour later, she paused in the doorway, her gaze lingering on the boys, then shifting to Angela. "Keep doing whatever you're doing," she instructed, her voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "I'll adjust the official protocol to incorporate your methods." Andrew sank back in his chair, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. That night, he didn't just watch the current footage. He dove back, day by day, week by week, a desperate archaeologist unearthing a lost civilization. He watched Angela on the floor with Eric, tirelessly guiding his legs through walking patterns, over and over. The same movement, the same rhythm, patient, unwavering, never betraying a hint of frustration or defeat. He watched her cradle Philip's hands, coaxing him to bear weight on his feet, if only for fleeting seconds at a time. His small legs trembling, then holding, then trembling again. Yet each day he held for a fraction longer. He watched her work with Adam, leading him through arm exercises set to music, his tiny limbs moving stiffly at first, then gradually smoother, more controlled. Andrew then pulled up footage from Angela's first week. The boys sat passively in their wheelchairs, eyes vacant, lost in a distant world. He juxtaposed it with footage from yesterday. Philip reaching for a toy placed deliberately out of reach on his tray. Eric's foot tapping subtly to the rhythm of the music. Adam holding his head steady, his eyes tracking Angela as she moved around the room. The transformation was undeniable, a stark testament to her unwavering dedication. Andrew's hands trembled on the keyboard. He opened a new browser window and typed neuroplasticity in children with cerebral palsy. The screen flooded with results, medical journals, case studies, research papers from universities he vaguely recognized. He clicked on the first link. Early intervention in pediatric cerebral palsy cases has shown remarkable results in neural pathway development. He clicked on another. Repetitive motor pattern training can stimulate the brain to form new connections, bypassing damaged areas. And another, the infant and toddler brain demonstrates extraordinary plasticity. With consistent targeted intervention, children with CP have achieved mobility outcomes far exceeding initial prognosis. Andrew read until his eyes burned, until the words blurred into an indecipherable mess, until 3 a.m. had come and gone, leaving the house cloaked in an oppressive silence. Everything Angela had said, the neural pathways, the brain's capacity to rewire itself, the critical importance of early intervention. It was all there, laid out in black and white, validated by peer-reviewed medical journals. And he'd never bothered to look. Not once in 2 years. He'd blindly accepted the initial doctor's pronouncements as gospel, embraced their bleak verdict as a death sentence, stopped researching, stopped questioning, stopped hoping. Andrew closed the laptop, plunging his office into darkness. His sons were improving. Actually improving, achieving milestones that those initial specialists had deemed impossible. And he'd almost fired the woman responsible. Twice, a wave of nausea churned in his stomach. For 2 years, he'd poured money into perpetuating his son's limitations. Expensive wheelchairs, specialized medical equipment, nurses who catered to their comfort within their diagnosis. But he'd never once fought for something more. Angela had been here for 4 weeks, earning a meager $15 an hour, and she'd accomplished what his millions couldn't touch because she believed. And he'd stopped believing the day Sarah died. Andrew's eyes burned, his throat constricted. Shame. That was the overwhelming feeling that threatened to suffocate him. Deep, crushing shame. He'd failed his sons, not through a lack of love, but through a crippling lack of expectation, by surrendering to defeat before the battle had even begun. Sarah would never have accepted it. She would have devoured every medical journal, consulted every specialist, explored every unconventional method. She would have fought with every ounce of her being. But Sarah was gone, and Andrew had buried his own fighting spirit alongside her, until Angela walked through his door and forced him to confront what he'd forgotten, that giving up was a choice, and he'd been consciously choosing it every single day. Andrew didn't sleep that night or the next. He wandered the silent house like a ghost, revisiting rooms he'd intentionally avoided for years, the formal dining room where he and Sarah had envisioned hosting joyous holiday dinners, the sunroom where she dreamed of reading while the boys played at her feet, the nursery with its yellow walls and the whimsical animal mural she'd painted herself with such loving care. He opened that door for the first time in 18 months. A thick layer of dust coated everything, a visible manifestation of his neglect. The 3 cribs stood in a silent semicircle, each one a painful reminder of what could have been. A mobile of stars and moons hung motionless above them, frozen in time. Sarah's rocking chair sat forlornly in the corner, a folded blanket draped over its arm, a ghostly imprint of her presence. Andrew stood frozen in the doorway, unable to bring himself to step inside. This was supposed to be their life, their joy. He closed the door, shutting out the ghosts of what might have been, and walked away. Friday morning, he bypassed his office entirely. Instead, he found himself sitting in the hallway outside the therapy room, his back pressed against the wall, listening. Angela was inside with the boys. He could hear her voice, clear and encouraging, filtering through the closed door. "That's it, Philip. Just like that. See, your legs know what to do. We just have to remind them." Andrew closed his eyes, willing himself to absorb her unwavering optimism. "Eric, baby, look at you. You're holding that toy so tight. You're so strong." His throat ached with a grief he thought he'd already exhausted. "Adam, sweet boy, you watching your brothers? You're learning, aren't you? Taking it all in." Andrew pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. What had he done? For 2 years, he'd hidden behind screens and spreadsheets, delegating the emotional labor of loving his sons to paid professionals, because he was too broken to do it himself. He'd accepted their limitations as immutable facts, because accepting defeat was easier than grappling with the daunting reality of hope. And all the while, his boys had been waiting, silently waiting for someone to truly see them, to recognize the potential that lay dormant within. Angela saw them. A stranger saw what their own father had been too blind to notice. A burst of laughter erupted from within the room, small and breathy, but undeniably real. One of the boys, maybe Philip, maybe all three. His heart cracked. He should be in there. He should be the one making them laugh, the one guiding their movements, the one holding their hands and whispering words of encouragement, reminding them that they were capable of achieving the impossible. But he didn't know how anymore. Sarah had taken that part of him with her when she died. Andrew stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak and unsteady. He walked back to his office, but he didn't turn on the monitors. Instead, he sat at his desk and stared at the framed photograph he kept hidden in his drawer. Sarah, 8 months pregnant, radiating an almost ethereal glow. Her hands rested protectively on her swollen belly, and she was looking directly at the camera with an expression of such profound hope that it physically ached to witness. "I'm sorry," Andrew whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sorry for giving up. Sorry for hiding. Sorry for letting fear win." He gently placed the photo back in the drawer and opened his laptop. Not to passively observe through the sterile lens of a security camera this time, but to actively seek answers. He searched for pediatric neurologists, specialists in early intervention, therapists who wholeheartedly embrace the concept of neuroplasticity. He meticulously compiled a list of names, phone numbers, and email addresses. If Angela could achieve this much in just 4 weeks with nothing but unwavering faith and consistent effort, what could be accomplished with genuine support, adequate resources, and a renewed belief in the power of possibility? Andrew stared at the list, a flicker of something long dormant stirring within his chest. Not quite hope, but something akin to it, a nascent possibility taking root. He closed the laptop and stood up, a newfound resolve hardening his gaze. It was almost afternoon, approaching the boys' scheduled rest period. Almost time. Andrew took a deep breath, bracing himself. He wasn't ready to walk into that room yet, not yet prepared to confront the man he'd become, or the father he'd failed to be. But maybe tomorrow he'd find the courage to try. He couldn't possibly know that tomorrow would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. That in less than 24 hours, he'd glance at his phone and witness something that would bring him to his knees, shattering his carefully constructed world and forcing him to rebuild it from the ground up. But for now, Andrew sat in his quiet office, nurturing the smallest seed of belief. And somewhere down the hall, Angela was teaching his sons to walk. Thursday afternoon found Andrew hunched over his desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating his weary face. He was attempting to review quarterly reports for his company, the endless columns of numbers swimming before his eyes. He couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the therapy room. It was almost 3 p.m. Angela would be wrapping up the boys' afternoon exercises. He'd watched the routine so many times he had it memorized: music first, then targeted motor pattern training, culminating in the reaching exercises. His phone buzzed, jolting him back to the present. Motion alert. Living room. Andrew frowned, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The boys were supposed to be in the therapy room at this hour. He picked up his phone and opened the security app, fully expecting to see Angela moving them for a snack or a change of scenery. The image on the screen took a moment to register, the mundane normalcy of the scene at odds with the alarm bells ringing in his head. 3 wheelchairs sat neatly against the wall, empty. Andrew's stomach plummeted. His initial thought was a surge of blind panic. Something happened. An emergency. The nurse had to rush them to the hospital. Then he saw them. In the center of the living room, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun, standing on the gleaming hardwood floor, were Philip, Eric, and Adam. Andrew's breath hitched in his throat, his lungs refusing to cooperate. His 3 sons, his paralyzed sons, the boys the doctors had declared would never stand, were upright, wobbly, shaking, but undeniably standing on their own 2 feet. Angela knelt in front of them, approximately 5 feet away, her arms stretched wide open in an unwavering invitation. Tears streamed down her face, carving glistening paths through her freckled skin. "Come on, babies," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Come to me. You can do it." 1 step. Andrew couldn't breathe. He was drowning in a wave of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. Philip moved first. His small foot lifted tentatively from the ground, hovered momentarily, then landed again, an inch further forward. A step. Andrew's hand flew to his mouth, stifling a cry. Eric went next, more cautious, his small face etched with concentration. His legs trembled violently, threatening to buckle beneath him, but he persevered. 1 foot, then the other. 2 steps. A sound escaped Andrew's throat, something between a gasp and a sob, a primal expression of disbelief and burgeoning hope. Adam, the smallest, the most withdrawn, the one who often kept his eyes tightly closed, stood there shaking, his arms extended for balance, his tiny body a testament to his unwavering effort. Angela reached towards him, her voice a soothing balm. "You can do it, sweet boy. I'm right here." Adam's foot lifted, came down. Another lift. Another step. 3 steps. Andrew watched his youngest son walk, however haltingly, towards Angela's outstretched arms. His phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the desk, but he didn't even register the sound. His knees buckled beneath him, unable to support the weight of the moment. Andrew slid down from his chair, his back scraping against the unforgiving edge of the desk, until he was sitting on the floor, his legs splayed out uselessly in front of him. On the phone screen, face down but still transmitting the scene unfolding in the living room, he could hear Angela's voice, choked with emotion. "Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Look at you. Look at what you're doing." The boys reached her. She gathered all 3 into her arms, pulling them against her chest, sobbing openly, her body racked with emotion. "I knew it," she cried, her voice thick with tears. "I knew you could. I knew it." Andrew sat on his office floor, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what he was witnessing. Tears poured down his face, a torrent of emotion washing away years of carefully constructed defenses. His whole body shook with the force of it. 2 years. 2 years of doctors saying never. 2 years of specialists confirming the impossible. 2 years of accepting that his sons were destined to spend their lives confined to wheelchairs. And there they were, standing, walking, reaching towards a woman who stubbornly refused to believe what the world had told her. Andrew pressed both hands against his face and wept, the sound raw and guttural, emanating from the depths of his soul. Not quiet tears, not controlled grief, but something far deeper, something breaking open inside him that had been locked away since the day Sarah died. Every failure, every betrayal, every night spent passively watching screens instead of actively engaging with his sons. The shame, the fear, the hope he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it even existed. It all came flooding out in waves that shook his entire body. His sons could walk. His sons could walk. And he'd almost given up on them. Andrew didn't know how long he sat on that floor, lost in the labyrinth of his own emotions. Minutes, maybe hours. When he finally found the strength to stand, his legs felt hollow, as if all the strength had been drained from them. He grabbed the edge of the desk and pulled himself up, his muscles protesting with every movement. His phone lay face down on the desk, still showing the living room feed. Andrew didn't pick it up. He didn't need to watch anymore. The image was burned into his memory, an indelible testament to the power of hope and the unwavering spirit of his sons. He walked out of his office on unsteady feet, down the long hallway, past the empty frames on the walls, past the oppressive silence he'd built around himself like a suit of armor. The living room door was open, beckoning him forward. He stopped in the doorway, hesitant to intrude. Angela sat on the floor, all three boys nestled in her lap, their small bodies exhausted from their monumental effort, limp against her chest. She held them like they were made of the most precious substance imaginable, her face wet with tears, but radiating a quiet, triumphant smile. She looked up when she sensed his presence in the doorway. Their eyes met, locking in a silent exchange of understanding and unspoken emotion. Andrew expected to see triumph in her face, a justifiable pride, a look that silently proclaimed, "I told you so," but that's not what he saw. He saw compassion, understanding. For him, Angela didn't say anything, just watched him with those steady, unwavering eyes, holding his sons close, radiating an aura of unconditional love and acceptance. Andrew's legs gave out again, his strength completely depleted. He knelt in the doorway, unable to take another step, the weight of his past failures crushing him. "How?" he choked out, his voice cracking with emotion. "How did you know?" Angela looked down at the boys, then back at him, her gaze filled with empathy. "I didn't know, Mr. Grant," she said softly, her voice gentle and reassuring. "I just believed." Something broke inside Andrew, shattering the last vestige of his carefully constructed defenses. The last wall, the final barrier he'd erected to protect himself from further pain, crumbled into dust. He crawled forward on his knees, drawn by an irresistible force, until he reached them. His hands shook uncontrollably as he gently touched Philip's face, his fingers tracing the delicate curve of his cheek. Then Eric's, then Adam's, his youngest son, the one he had almost given up on. His sons. For 2 years, he'd watched them through screens, loved them from a distance, kept his heart locked away, fearing that losing more would completely destroy him. But they were here, alive, fighting, growing, and he'd almost missed it. Andrew gathered all 3 boys into his arms, pulling them close, pressing his face against their small heads, breathing in their familiar scent. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry," he repeated, over and over, a desperate litany of regret and remorse, an apology for every day he'd spent hiding, every night he'd chosen fear over faith, every moment he'd allowed grief to steal from them. Angela quietly moved back, giving him space, understanding that this was a moment that belonged solely to him and his sons. But Andrew reached out and grabbed her hand, holding on tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. "Stay," he pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. "Please." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. They sat there together on the living room floor, a broken father holding his sons close, a faithful woman who had stubbornly refused to give up on them. For wheelchairs pushed against the wall, silent sentinels of a past that no longer defined them. Andrew looked at Angela through blurred vision, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "You gave them their legs," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "No, Mr. Grant. They gave themselves their legs. I just reminded them they could try." Andrew closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the profound simplicity of her words. Sarah would have loved this woman. Sarah would have loved this moment. And somewhere, he desperately believed, she was watching, her heart swelling with pride. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt different now, imbued with a sense of warmth and renewed purpose. Not empty, not abandoned, but alive. Andrew held his sons tighter, feeling the weight of their small bodies against him, and allowed himself to feel something he'd long forgotten existed. Hope. Not fragile hope, not cautious hope, but real hope, the kind that demands everything and gives back more. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More therapy, more challenges, more struggles to overcome. But for the first time in 2 years, Andrew Grant wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because he finally understood that miracles don't need permission. They just need someone brave enough to believe they're possible.